I've never been one to believe in the supernatural. I enjoy urban exploration, especially of places with a dark history, and Germany's Beelitz-Heilstätten had been on my list for years. This sprawling, abandoned military hospital has a reputation for being one of the most haunted places in Europe. With its decaying walls and forgotten history, it seemed like the perfect spot to scratch my itch for adventure. I made plans to visit while backpacking through Europe. A short train ride from Berlin brought me to this forgotten town, where the hospital looms over the landscape like a relic of a time when the world was falling apart. It was built in the late 1800s as a tuberculosis sanatorium, later used as a field hospital during World War I. Its most famous patient, Adolf Hitler, was treated for a leg injury here. After the war, the Soviets took over the facility during their occupation of East Germany, using it as a military hospital. The place has seen more suffering and death than any building should. Most people who visit come during the day in organized groups, but I thought it would be more thrilling to go solo around dusk. The sun was low in the sky when I got there, and the overgrown pathways leading to the hospital were eerily quiet. The exterior of the building is beautiful in a grotesque kind of way, with vines creeping up the cracked brick walls and smashed out windows. Graffiti covers almost every inch of the lower levels, but it's clear this place hasn't been cared for in decades. The minute I stepped inside, I was overwhelmed by the smell of mold and decaying wood. The building was in worse shape than I expected. The roof was caving in at several spots, allowing slivers of dying sunlight to cut through the gloom. Dust particles floated in the air like dead snowflakes. The entire place felt suffocating. Every step I took echoed through the empty halls, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't supposed to be there. I wandered through the hallways, my flashlight illuminating faded murals and forgotten medical equipment. The place had an oppressive weight to it, like every wall and ceiling was soaked in sadness. It felt like the building was trying to press down on me. As I moved deeper inside, the outside world faded away. I could no longer hear the sounds of birds or the occasional passing car. The silence was absolute, and that's when I started to feel it, the sense that I wasn't alone. I made my way to one of the operating rooms, a massive open space with a rusted metal bed in the center. The straps hanging off the sides caught my attention. They looked newer than the rest of the room, like they had been used recently. A cold shiver ran down my spine. The place felt wrong, like it was still alive in some horrible, twisted way. That's when I heard the first noise, a faint shuffling sound from the hallway behind me. It was soft but deliberate, like someone was walking slowly, trying not to be noticed. I froze, heart racing, telling myself it was probably just another explorer, but when I called out, no one answered. The shuffling continued, getting closer, echoing off the walls. I didn't move at first, trying to rationalize what I was hearing. Maybe it was an animal, or the wind moving something in the building. But the sound was too distinct, too human. Slowly, I backed out of the operating room and peeked around the corner. The hallway was empty, but the sound persisted, as if someone or something was following me, staying just out of sight. I kept walking, my pace quickening with every step. The hospital seemed to come alive around me, the walls groaning, the air thickening. I could feel eyes on me, though every time I looked back, I saw nothing. The hallways stretched on forever, each door I passed leading to another room full of forgotten horrors. Old medical instruments were scattered on the floor, covered in dust, but they felt untouched by time. It was as if they were waiting to be used again. Finally, I made it back to the entrance and sprinted out into the fading daylight, gasping for air. The oppressive weight lifted the moment I stepped outside, but my heart was still racing. I stood by my car, staring at the building. It felt like something was watching me from the windows, hidden in the darkness. I haven't told anyone about what happened, and I certainly haven't gone back. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forget the sound of those footsteps. Beelitz-Heilstätten may be abandoned, but something is still there, and it's not friendly. If you've ever been fascinated by urban exploration, you've probably heard of Pripyat, the ghost city near Chernobyl. For years, I'd watched documentaries and read stories about the place, imagining what it would be like to walk through a city frozen in time. When I finally had the chance to visit, I thought it would be an exciting adventure, a chance to see history up close. What I didn't expect was the overwhelming sense of dread that hit me the moment I stepped foot in the city. We arrived early in the morning. The air was still, and the only sounds were the occasional rustling of leaves in the wind. The exclusion zone around Chernobyl is eerily beautiful. Nature has reclaimed the land, with trees and vines overtaking the buildings. But there's something unsettling about it. It feels like the land is alive, watching, waiting for you to make a wrong move. Pripyat is massive, and walking through it feels like stepping into a time capsule. The city was evacuated after the Chernobyl disaster in 1986, and most of it has been untouched since then. Buildings stand empty, windows smashed out, and the streets are littered with debris. Old Soviet propaganda posters still hang on the walls, faded and torn, but the message remains clear. This was once a thriving, proud city. The first few hours of exploring were uneventful. We wandered through the crumbling apartment buildings, schools, and hospitals, all of which looked like they had been abandoned in a hurry. There were toys scattered across the floor of the school, textbooks still open on desks, and children's shoes left behind as families fled. It was haunting, but nothing out of the ordinary for an abandoned city. Then we reached the amusement park, one of the most iconic parts of Pripyat. The Ferris wheel stands tall and rusted, looming over the park like a monument to the lives that were lost. The bumper cars are still there, covered in rust and overgrown with weeds. The silence in the park was suffocating. It was like the whole world had stopped. As we explored the park, I noticed something strange, a faint ringing sound like the distant echo of a bell. At first, I thought it was just in my head, but it grew louder the closer we got to the Ferris wheel. I asked the guide if he heard it too, but he shrugged it off, saying the wind plays tricks on you here. Still, the sound persisted, like a distant alarm that never stopped ringing. Then we reached the school, and that's when things got really weird. the school is one of the most eerie places in Pripyat. Classrooms are still filled with textbooks, chalkboards covered in old lessons, and the occasional doll or toy left behind. The air inside the building felt heavy, like it was pressing down on me. As I walked through the classrooms, I kept feeling this strange sensation, like someone was watching me. It wasn't the kind of feeling you get when you know someone's nearby. It was more primal, like there was something malevolent just out of sight. I tried to shake it off, but it only got worse. I was standing in the middle of a classroom, looking at the rows of desks, when I heard it, a child's giggle. It was faint at first, like it was coming from the other side of the building, but it was unmistakable. I froze, heart pounding, listening. The giggle came again, louder this time, and it sounded closer. I told myself it was just my imagination, but then the sound of footsteps followed. Small, quick steps, like a child running. My blood ran cold. I turned toward the door, expecting to see one of my fellow tourists playing a prank, but the hallway was empty. I walked toward the sound, thinking maybe someone had wandered off, but the giggling continued, echoing down the empty halls. It felt like it was everywhere, surrounding me. But no matter how far I walked, I couldn't find the source. My heart was racing, and I could feel sweat dripping down my back. That's when I saw it. At the end of the hall, a shadow darted into one of the rooms. I ran. I bolted out of the school, not stopping until I was back outside, gasping for breath. The rest of the group looked at me like I was crazy, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me. I tried to calm down, telling myself it was just my imagination. But as we left the school, another tourist came up to me. She didn't say much, just asked if I had heard anything strange. I nodded, and she said quietly, "I heard the giggling too." I haven't been able to shake that day. I don't know what it was, and I don't want to know. When I first heard about La Isla de las Muñecas, or the Island of Dolls, I thought it was just one of those quirky tourist traps you visit for fun Instagram photos. The island, located just south of Mexico City, is famous for the thousands of creepy dolls that hang from its trees. According to the legend, the island's caretaker, Don Julian Santana, found the body of a young girl who had drowned in the canals. To appease her spirit, he began collecting dolls and hanging them around the island. Over the years, more dolls were added, and now the place looks like a scene from a horror movie. It seemed like a fun place to visit with friends, so one weekend we rented a boat and made the trip to the island. The ride through the canals was peaceful enough, with the water reflecting the vibrant greenery around us. But as we approached the island, the mood shifted. The trees were thick and overgrown, and hundreds of mutilated dolls hung from the branches. Some had no eyes, others had missing limbs, and many were covered in dirt and grime. It was unsettling, to say the least. When we docked, the first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. There were no sounds of birds or insects, just the rustling of the leaves and the occasional creak of a doll swaying in the breeze. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating, and the island seemed much smaller than I had imagined. It was like stepping into another world, one where time didn't move the same way. As we wandered through the island, I started to feel uneasy. My friends were joking around, laughing at the creepy dolls and snapping photos, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. The dolls seemed to be watching us, their empty eyes following our every move. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself it was just my imagination, but the feeling persisted. We made our way to the shack where Don Julian had lived. It was a small, dilapidated structure filled with old, rotting furniture and more dolls. The air inside was thick and musty, and I felt a sudden wave of nausea as soon as I stepped in. My heart started racing, and I had this overwhelming urge to get out of there. Yet tried to tell my friends that we should leave, but they were too caught up in exploring. I walked outside to get some air, but as soon as I stepped onto the path, I heard it, a whisper. It was faint, almost like a breath in the wind, but it was unmistakable. It said my name. I stopped, heart pounding, and looked around. My friends were still inside the shack, laughing and talking, but the whisper came again, clearer this time. It was like someone was standing right behind me, whispering in my ear. I turned toward one of the dolls hanging from the trees, and for a split second, I swear I saw its head move. It was subtle, just a small tilt, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. I backed away slowly, trying to keep my breathing steady, but the whisper followed me, growing louder. I ran back to the boat, yelling for my friends to hurry up. They thought I was overreacting, but something about that island wasn't right. The moment we got back on the water, the oppressive feeling lifted, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us as we left. That night, I had nightmares about the dolls. I dreamt they were moving, crawling through the trees, their hollow eyes staring into my soul. I woke up in a cold sweat, and the whispers from the island echoed in my ears. I don't know if it was just the atmosphere messing with my head or something more, but one thing is for sure. I'm never going back to the island of dolls.